The Galactic Senate chamber pulsed with the low murmur of 1,000 alien delegates, their voices overlapping in a sea of arrogance and amusement. At the center of the domed room, bathed in the glow of pale blue light, stood the human ambassador, still, silent, watching. Humans, declared High Strategos Varkolan, his voice booming through the chamber, are a species of dreamers. Traders. Farmers. They speak of peace not because they cherish it, but because they fear the alternative. Laughter rippled through the assembly like a disease. Towering reptiles hissed in amusement, feathered diplomats clacked their beaks in derision, and psionic representatives from the Telvari simply smirked with narrowed eyes. A display screen above rotated through battlefield statistics from Earth's brief skirmishes, clean, small-scale conflicts by galactic standards. No great wars. No conquests. No bloody reputation. The ambassador didn't blink. He didn't speak. He simply watched. They wish to join our military coalition, Varkolan continued, mockery curling in his voice. They send trade envoys, not warriors. Let them know, this is not a marketplace. This is the order of power. And power demands blood. The screen flickered again, now showing Earth's request for an investigation into the attack on Epsilon 12, a small colony outpost in neutral space. Dozens dead. Orbital defenses breached. The evidence pointed directly to the Empire's own shadow fleet, but the Strategos waved it away. Pirates, he shrugged. Your settlers were simply unlucky. Silence followed. Not a breath from the human delegate. Not a twitch. Varkolan grinned. Oh, he added, send us one of your warriors. If you have any. On Earth, half a galaxy away, the footage of the Senate broadcast played on a dozen screens inside a sealed bunker beneath the Atlantic. Play it again, said Admiral Leong, her voice cold. The broadcast looped. Across the room, a panel of officers, tacticians, and intelligence heads sat in a circle of restrained fury. No one spoke first. Finally, the oldest man in the room leaned forward. His hair was iron gray, his expression etched in stone. Don't send a battalion, General Asante said. Send one man. The others stared. Leong blinked. You're suggesting psychological retaliation? One officer asked. No, Asante replied. I'm suggesting we remind them what real fear looks like. The silence that followed was not out of doubt, but recognition. They all knew the name that would follow. Darius Cole. His file read like fiction, over 200 Black Ops missions, a survivor of Ghost Zone incursions, trained in zero-gravity combat, planetary insurgency, deep infiltration sabotage. A Navy SEAL so lethal that during his final deployment, the operation had been halted not because of failure, but because he'd succeeded too fast. He was also off-grid. Officially retired. Some said he'd vanished into the Scottish Highlands. Others believed he lived aboard a drifting fishing barge off the Kamchatka coast. When the courier drone finally found him, Cole was knee-deep in snow, skin weathered, eyes like cracked ice. He didn't say a word as he read the mission brief. He didn't need to. His silence was agreement. Back on Earth, preparations began immediately. No fleets. No grand announcement. Just a stealth insertion plan, an unmarked corvette, and the most advanced infiltration pod humanity had ever built. Codename, Obsidian Ghost. No nuclear payloads. No orbital support. Cole didn't request weapons. Just tools, ones he would repurpose as needed. His mission wasn't to kill. It was to demonstrate. As the cryopod sealed around him, Admiral Leong stood beside the launch console. She studied his face through the reinforced glass. They think we fear war, she said. Show them we fear nothing. Cole didn't blink. The pod hissed. Lights dimmed. Then silence. The launch tube shuddered as it expelled the obsidian pod into deep space. It vanished from radar in under 2 seconds. No trace. No trail. One man, headed into the heart of the Galactic Empire. In the chamber of the Senate, the delegates eventually stopped laughing. But the silence came too late. By then, shadows had already begun to move. And Darius Cole was already en route. The landing was smooth in the way only terrifying precision could be, Darius Cole's cryopod pierced Caraxus Prime's upper atmosphere under a layer of cloaked debris, guided by a micropulse AI that buried its digital scent before impact. It struck a slag heap outside the industrial arcology of Sector 12, cracked open silently, and vanished into the shadows with its passenger. Darius moved like a ghost woven from muscle and training. His suit was skin-tight obsidian mesh, adaptive camouflage, reactive temperature control, and a breathing filter capable of mimicking local atmospheric rhythms. His heartbeat was slow. His thoughts were sharper than razors. The Empire's capital world wasn't what the diplomatic holos made it seem. Beneath the glimmering towers and sky barges was a choking underbelly of maintenance tunnels, waste processing corridors, and forgotten vaults full of flickering lights and forgotten lives. That's where Cole moved, unseen, unheard, unstoppable. Within the first 6 hours, 3 patrol stations reported communications failure. By hour 10, an entire surveillance hub in Subsector Delta had gone dark. The Empire's response was procedural at first: reroute power, deploy diagnostics teams, blame outdated infrastructure. But then the corpses began to surface. Not that Darius left them in obvious places. Each one was posed with precision, guards bound to chairs with their own restraints, weapons untouched, eyes frozen wide in death. One had a human tooth embedded in the wall beside him. Another had a single earth coin placed on his tongue. Darius didn't speak their language, but symbolism needed no translation. The Empire's officers didn't understand it at first. They chalked it up to rebellion, a local insurrection. But Cole didn't behave like a rebel. He knew the building schematics better than they did. He bypassed motion detectors, walked blind corridors, and appeared on security footage only as flickers, shadows that moved when no one else did. At hour 17, he triggered a controlled blackout across an entire military district. 10 square kilometers plunged into darkness. No backup grid. No emergency beacon. Just black silence and whispers. He left a message on a gutted security console, carved with a combat knife into the alloy frame: "I am already inside." Panic started as a ripple, then a current. Caraxus Prime had not seen a security breach in centuries. Their enemies attacked from fleets, not from inside their walls. They built defenses for armies, not phantoms. Every time the generals adjusted their protocols, Cole was already 2 steps ahead. He didn't just sabotage, he orchestrated. One of his most devastating moves was not an attack, but a story. He hijacked the internal entertainment stream and broadcast archival footage of Earth's wars: Fallujah, Verdun, Stalingrad, Mogadishu. No narration. No captions. Just raw sound and imagery. Screaming, fire, artillery, blood. The footage looped for 11 minutes before being terminated by Imperial override. By then, it had played in 4 languages and across 3 command decks. Rumors ignited like dry forest fire. Soldiers whispered of a Terran weapon that looked like a man but hunted like an animal. Some called him the Night Knife, others simply said it when they meant him. Darius never saw their fear directly, but he heard it in the pattern of their footsteps, the changes in their patrol routes, the new tremble in their electronic transmissions. He wasn't just killing, he was converting confidence into dread. Somewhere inside the Citadel command tower, High Strategos Varkolan slammed his fist into a holoconsole as more reports streamed in. Supply lines interrupted. Senior officers missing. Junior soldiers refusing assignments in the lower levels. One aide suggested increasing drone patrols. Another proposed orbital sweeps. A third whispered the word retreat. Varkolan's voice cut through them all. It's one man. Even he didn't believe it anymore. Cole didn't revel in the fear. He didn't laugh. He didn't even speak. His every movement was a calculation. He neutralized targets that posed risk, but otherwise let panic rot them from the inside. He planted sonic disruptors in air ducts to create unsettling vibrations. He triggered emergency drills at random hours to keep the enemy sleep-deprived. He once opened a water main just enough to mimic the sound of footsteps echoing through the walls. He was one soldier, but he fought like a doctrine. By hour 34, the Empire's official response shifted. They declared martial law on Caraxes Prime. Unauthorized movement was punishable by death. Entire wings of the citadel were evacuated. Troops began to hallucinate from exhaustion. Some claimed to see him even when he wasn't there. But Darius was there. When he slipped into the administrative ring of the War Council, bypassing retina scans and thermal checkpoints, he paused, not out of hesitation, but because he'd reached the crescendo. The generals, the admirals, the same smug elites who had once laughed in the Senate, were now buried in emergency reports and half-formed excuses. They feared shadows and static. They still didn't understand they weren't being hunted by a soldier, they were being shown what war really meant. He left them another message, this time carved into the leather of a high officer's chair, just beneath where a general's body had once sat. Fear is the beginning of wisdom. Yours came too late. By the time they realized he'd been in the room, Cole was already gone. No alarms. No breach alerts. Just a dead silence that spread like a virus through the Empire's upper command. And still, he hadn't said a word. The War Council gathered in a subterranean vault beneath Caraxes Prime, thick walls lined with quantum steel, psionic dampeners active, no transmissions in or out. 12 of the Empire's most decorated strategists sat at a crescent table, their uniforms perfect, their expressions anything but calm. Every entry point was sealed. Surveillance drones swept the hallways in rotating intervals. Security protocols had been rewritten from the ground up. Yet no one felt safe. High Strategos Varkolan hadn't slept in 2 days. He wore his war medallions like armor, not out of pride but desperation. His voice trembled as he reviewed the losses. 39 confirmed personnel dead, 4 times that number unaccounted for, 2 key power stations disabled, command terminals compromised, and, most damning of all, morale annihilated. The term terror weapon had begun appearing in private communiques. There is no confirmation he exists, Varkolan said, more to convince himself than the room. No visuals. No audio. Only myths and death. Admiral Ken, his face drawn and gray, whispered, "We are being undone by a single ghost." They didn't notice the flicker in the room's corner. The hologram projector didn't beep or hum, it simply activated. No signal, no source. Just a static bloom that resolved into an image. A human face. Scarred. Calm. Eyes that seemed to cut through light itself. Darius Cole. He didn't speak right away. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then he leaned forward, his voice low, steady, devoid of performance. "You mistook kindness for weakness. Diplomacy for cowardice." Half the council stood from their seats. Guards scrambled. Weapons were raised. But the image remained still. "You believed humans feared war," Cole continued, "because we didn't bring it to your doorstep. The truth is, we locked it away. For your sake." A low click echoed through the chamber. Underneath the council table, embedded in the floor's alloy, a blinking red light had appeared. Microfissures laced the sealant where no one had noticed them before. The war room's heartbeat faltered. "I'm not here to conquer," he said. "I'm here to remind you. Earth doesn't need an army. We just need intent." The explosion was surgical, not lethal, but loud enough to rupture the inner sanctum's pressure seals and drop the chamber into a half-second gravity collapse. Lights flared. Sirens screamed. Dust choked the air. When the emergency shields blinked on, the hologram was gone. So was the War Council's illusion of superiority. The aftermath unraveled quickly. Empire-wide broadcasts attempted to downplay the breach. Official statements described an internal failure. But within hours, classified reports were leaked. Dissent stirred in the outer colonies. Allied species began questioning their oaths. The whispers spread planet to planet. The human didn't come with an army, he came alone, and still won. Back on Earth, the mission's conclusion was logged with only a single sentence: asset extracted. Objective achieved. Darius Cole returned the way he had left, quietly, through a retrieval drone that scooped him from a freight tunnel 3 kilometers beneath the capital. The pod carried him beyond the Empire's detection range, then slipped into a black site ship waiting in the shadow of a dead moon. No interviews. No commendations. Only silence. He didn't debrief. He didn't explain. He simply walked from the landing bay, through a narrow corridor, and back into the quiet wilderness he'd come from. No one stopped him. No one asked him to stay. Weeks later, in the same Galactic Senate chamber where Earth had once been mocked, a new human ambassador stood at the podium. The room, once loud with disdain, now sat in reverent silence. "We came in peace," the ambassador said. "We still do. But let this moment be remembered." He paused. No one dared interrupt. "The next time you ask whether humanity fears war, remember this: you only met one of us." The feed ended. Across the stars, those who had once laughed at Earth now studied every shadow. And in the minds of soldiers across the galaxy, a question remained unanswered, not where the Terran operative had gone, but whether he was already standing behind them. Winter settled slowly over the northern coast of Earth, casting long shadows across the jagged rocks where waves crashed in rhythmic fury. Darius Cole stood alone at the edge of the cliff, salt wind tugging at the sleeves of his weathered jacket, eyes fixed on the distant horizon. His breath was slow, controlled, as if every exhale carried away a fragment of the war that still clung to his bones. He had returned not as a hero, not as a legend, but as a man who had seen the edge of civilization and chosen not to tip it into chaos. The world hadn't celebrated his return. No parades, no headlines. Just a single encrypted message in his inbox, thanking him for what would never be publicly acknowledged. Behind him, the world turned quietly. Earth went on building, trading, exploring. Peace endured, tenuous but real. The Galactic Empire had ceased all border provocations. Caraxus Prime was under reconstruction. Entire sectors now whispered rumors of the ghost of Terra, and no Imperial commander had requested conflict with humanity since. But Darius knew it wasn't over. Peace, he'd learned, wasn't a destination, it was a negotiated pause. A fragile line maintained not by treaties or shared dreams, but by the unspoken promise of what would happen if it shattered. He carried that promise in the silence of his step, in the cold clarity of his gaze, in the memories etched deep behind his eyes. Every infiltration, every calculated breath, every decision to let fear bloom rather than fire, he remembered it all. A gull screamed overhead. Below, a small fishing vessel creaked toward the harbor. No one on it knew who he was. He liked it that way. His comlink buzzed once, barely audible. A coded pulse. He ignored it. Another pulse. Urgent this time. He closed his eyes. He wasn't ready. He also knew he'd never be. But readiness was never the point. Intent was. And they'd sent the message. Humanity didn't just endure war, we understood it. Better than most. Better than any who hadn't earned peace through blood and restraint. He turned, slowly, his boots crunching against the frost-laced gravel. Somewhere far above, unseen by anyone on Earth, a satellite adjusted its orbit to keep him in frame. A quiet request. A silent question. Would he come back? Darius didn't answer. He simply walked, disappearing into the tree line, back into the stillness he had fought so hard to preserve. War hadn't broken him. It had defined him, shaped him into the sharp edge that Earth could call upon, but only when absolutely necessary. He prayed they wouldn't call again. But if they did, he would answer.